Welcome to another edition of Whiskey, Games, and Nerd Stuff. Today's whiskey is Heaven's Door Revelation Double Barrel Whiskey with some ice. Let's go ahead and take a sip. This is so much better when you put ice in it and let it sit for a few minutes. And today's Nerd Stuff is a conversation about an article I came across in the January-February 2024 edition of Men's Health. Would You Like to Add a Tip by Chris Browning. I was actually talking about this very topic a few days ago with a couple of friends, and when I came across this particular article, I thought it would make a good video. So with that, let's go ahead and begin. Would you like to add a tip? 15%, 20%, 25%. If you're totally annoyed, confused, and frustrated about the current state of tipping, we get that. Here's how much to give and when. The touchscreen cash register may be the most diabolical invention of all time. The option to tip is now everywhere, and 72% of U.S. adults say tipping is expected in more places now than it was 5 years ago, according to a recent Pew survey. Deciding where, how much, and how often to give extra, especially on a latte you just paid $7 for, has led to tipping fatigue. I'm definitely noticing an influx of seeing those screens. I'm also seeing an influx when you go in somewhere and they flip around that screen and it has the add the tip, and you can tell everybody's kind of looking at you to see what you're going to click. You can blame the pandemic, which created the need for touchless payment options, and businesses quickly adopted the new technology. This came, however, with the unexpected side effects of default tip screen at the end of most transactions. I've also noticed on some of those screens, it used to be the lowest tip was on the left, and it would go up. Like on this magazine, it's 15%, 20%, and 25%. But I was at somewhere the other day, and they had the highest on the left, and it went down from there. It makes me wonder if that was intentional, to see if the people that would always do the lowest tip would unintentionally go ahead and click the highest tip. I kind of think that's a little deceptive. I'm curious to see if that's just something I'm seeing or if others are seeing that as well. Except asking people to leave yet another tip has actually resulted in service workers collecting fewer tips than they did during COVID. Yes, tipping overall is on the decline. I can actually see that, and I'm not surprised, to be honest. I think I've had more conversations with friends and family about tipping, when to tip, frustrations about tipping in the last year and a half than I probably had in the last 20 years, to be honest. Speaking of tipping, let's go ahead and take another quick tip of this drink. That is so much better when you put the ice on it. According to a 2023 Bankrate survey, only 65% of diners at sit-down restaurants always tip, which is down from 77% in 2019. The percentage of adults who always tip food delivery workers fell from 59% in 2021 to 50% in 2023. And the total amount that customers tip at full-service restaurants is also falling slightly, according to research from Toast, a tech company that specializes in restaurant ordering systems. To explain this tip dip, experts are pointing to continued inflation, corrections to higher than average tipping during the pandemic, and yes, tipping fatigue. Those touchscreens do give the option of no tip after all, and if you're sick of feeling nickel and dime, why not opt out altogether? Well, depending on which state you live in, the amount of money that a tipped employee is guaranteed varies widely. Federal minimum wage for tipped workers is $2.13 an hour. And I'm not 100%, but I think it's been $2.13 an hour since 1991. I feel like I've read an article or seen a video about that in the last month or so. And while there are seven states that require that tipped workers receive full minimum wage before tips, in the vast majority of states, our tips make a huge difference. And no, it's not fair that some employers put the responsibility for their employees' wages on their customers. This brings up an interesting question that's come a lot. I've had some people, and I'm sure you've heard it too, of, I wish we would just not tip and just add that into the price. So if you go out to eat, if you went to a restaurant that says tipping's not allowed, but you knew full well that 20% was charged on everything on the menu, and then that 20% was then to cover the everybody that would cover in theory is getting covered the tips, the waiters, the dishwashers, the cooks, etc. And I have seen some restaurants, depending on where I travel, where they'll put in there and some of them do it in bold print, and some of them do it in small fine print of, a 20% service fee has been added to each order, which begs the question is, if 20% service fee is added to your order or to your ticket that night, should you be required to tip on top of that? Still, that doesn't mean you have to tip. Whenever prompted, Barbara Sloan, author of Tipped, understands the fatigue, but she says part of the frustration comes from consumers not having their own predetermined rules regarding how much to tip, where, and when. Sloan suggests starting with a baseline 15% tip to any place that provides a service, sit-down restaurants, barbershops, massage spas, and then sliding upward to 25% depending on how involved the service is. Don't feel like you have to tip for a basic pickup order, like a black coffee to go. But if the barista frosts a cat face on your latte, feel free to tip that 15% or more. For further scenarios, see the new standards for tricky tips. Also know that tipping has a complicated past and wasn't even popular when it was first introduced to U.S. customers, but the practice, thought to be a European tradition, stuck around and became a way to pay low wages to recently freed enslaved people in the South in the 1800s. Tipping has always been fraught and likely will continue to be. I know that tipping can make an already expensive night out even more painful for your wallet. That said, the tip you decide to leave may have a massive effect on the life of your server, bartender, or Lyft driver. And even though the whole tipping system seems wrong, leaving a nice tip still feels pretty good. So there's a lot to unpack here with this article, and I think you could spend hours talking about this. I would love to hear what everybody's thoughts are, comments on what they feel the current tipping culture is. What do you feel the standard tip is? What's your experience with the dreaded touchscreens? I would also like to know what you tip on. Generally, I've always tipped on anything that is considered a service. Waitress, Uber, barbershop, artist that does a commission that I was very happy with the job, lawn service, mechanic, maintenance. When I had to have surgery and wasn't able to get around by myself, I don't remember what they were called, but every time I'd have to fly, and I did have to fly a lot, I wasn't able to get around the airport, so they had people that would push you around in wheelchairs back and forth. And I always made sure to tip those people, and I recall on a lot of conversations with them that nobody ever tipped them. And I remember thinking, well, geez, this person just spent the last 30 minutes pushing me on a wheelchair from the gate to the plane. How could I not tip them? I always make a point to tip valets, housekeepers when I stay at a hotel, delivery persons, and I always make a point of tipping the bartenders. And I do go to a lot of events where there's open bars and their drinks are free and they always have a tip bar. I always, even though knowing that, a company or somebody who's sponsoring the event pays for this, I always like to make a point to tip the staff that's at the institution that I'm at. And if I notice they don't have a tip jar, I ask them if they want to put one out. And I make a point of every time I go up there to leave a couple bucks on a drink. It's also a trick that I use to see how much I drink that night. So if I'm at an event and I get, I put $4 or $5 in my pocket every time I go up and order a drink, and I tip $5. When I'm out that $20, I know how much I drank. Or if it's just going to be a beer night, maybe I'll go up and give them $1 every time I get a beer. But it's a good trick to see how much you drink at those kind of events is, put a certain amount of money in your front pocket, and every time you go up and get a drink, give them that tip allotment. I think this also brings up a good question of, what's the difference between a tip and a service fee? And if a service fee is charged on a receipt or a bill, should you be required to pay a tip? I know I'd mentioned earlier that there's some restaurants that put on there or advertise that tips included, but I know there's been a few times that I've gone out and it did say tips included, and then I unintentionally left a tip on top of the bill that already had the tip. Really would be curious to see how many people have done that themselves. I'd also love to hear or ask people to put in the comments two things. What's the least amount you've ever tipped somebody and why? And then what's the most amount you've ever tipped somebody and why? And I would ask everybody to be respectful in the comments for the ones that left the least amount as well as the most amount. I don't want to shame anybody for leaving a smaller amount for the reasons they left it, nor do I want to shame anybody for leaving a large amount for the reasons they left it. And for those that have stayed with the channel since the beginning or have kind of gone back and watched some of the older videos, every now and then I will come across an article that I like to talk about with various magazines and books I would like to see. I know that's not typically something that you would expect in a channel called Whiskey Games and Nerd Stuff, you know, going from Magic the Gathering to, you know, a solo player game to Disney Lorcana, you name it, to a random article or book. But I do like to kind of open up the stuff to talk about different things. If this is something that you would like me to see, that you would like me to do more videos on, please leave a comment in the comment section, like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. At the filming of this particular episode, I believe we're just a few shy of 2,100 subscribers, and we have a goal to try and hit 2,500 subscribers. So I really would appreciate it for you to like, comment, share, subscribe, and all that fun stuff. And until next time, folks, cheers. Cheers.